Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, book fans, you are in luck this week because I'm going to do quite a few book videos. The game that I have set up on the table right now is taking me a little bit more time to get into before I can give some worthwhile thoughts to. So we're going to do some book stuff. And this video is basically about 5 works of horror fiction that you could read in October coming up. You know, the time for spooky books is right around the corner. And so I'm going to just list 5 books plus one kind of a bonus book to look out for if you want to read something. Some of these I think are a little under the radar, some are not. And so hopefully you find some good recommendations here. So the first one up that we're going to take a look at is from Thomas Ligotti. Now Thomas Ligotti is pretty famous in the horror world. He has yet to really transcend into the mainstream, and he probably never will. The closest we probably got to him being considered a mainstream horror author is one of his books of nonfiction, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, being one of the things that influenced Matthew McConaughey's character in the first season of True Detective. So my work is not yet done, was published in 2002, and it is a work of corporate horror, which is something that Ligotti writes about quite a bit. These stories, they examine like kind of the bizarre rituals at the horror of corporate life. They examine corporate entities as personifications of evil. They're dark, twisted, monolithic things that corrupt and destroy. And they also examine the poor saps who work for these entities. His work can be quite dark, mysterious, and I think you could say nihilistic, misanthropic. He doesn't have a lot of really great things to say about humanity most of the time. So my work is not yet done. It's a tale of workplace revenge and the demonic forces that exist within the walls and cubicles of an office. And so it starts off, I had always been afraid. However, as self-serving as this may sound, I never believed this to be the cause for shame or regret, even though an intolerable suffering may ensue from such a trait. It seemed to me that the finest people, as people go, cannot help but betray a fair portion of fear and insecurity, even full-blown panic. So right away, he's putting us in the mind of this lead character and just kind of the thoughts that he is going through at his place of work. So this collection here, it's a collection that contains one long novella or short novel, and it also contains 2 shorter works. And the shorter works, I think, are actually better than the title story of My Work Is Not Yet Done. The first one is called I Have a Special Plan for This World. So that was also the name of an album from Current 93. And it was based on a poem by Ligotti from the same name. And the lyrics in the performance by Current 93 on the album are of David Tibet reading the Ligotti's poem, and it is one of the scariest audio experiences you'll ever have. If you guys get a chance to listen to I Have a Special Place for This World, do it. But this is a fantastic work of corporate horror, and I just want to read this quick right here. I remember working in an office where the atmosphere of tension had become so severe and pervasive that one could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. This resulted in considerable difficulties for those of us who were trying to perform the tasks which our jobs required. For instance, if for some reason we needed to leave our desks and negotiate our way to another part of the building, it was not possible to see beyond a certain distance, which was at most a few feet. Outside of this limited perimeter, this cocoon of clarity, as I thought of it, everything became obscured in a kind of quivering blur, an ambience of agitation within which the solid and dreary decor of the company offices appeared quite distorted. That is just fantastic. So in this book, in that story, it's almost like the tension, the anxiety of an office environment becomes a tangible and palpable force. And then finally, we have a work called The Nightmare Network. And this is quite Ballardian in its construction, in its structure. It's a series of very short little works of kind of flash fiction that are classified ads and responses from a corporation where we learn about their dark inner workings. And again, it is very well written and very creepy and unsettling. So that was My Work Is Not Yet Done by Thomas Ligotti. Next up is a very, very special work, and that is The Complete Butcher's Tales from Rikki Ducornet. This book here is one of the most unique, one of the most unsettling works of horror fiction that I have ever read. This is a collection of super short works. There are over 50 stories in this. How many pages is it? 172 pages. And there are over 50 stories in here, ranging from a couple pages to a couple paragraphs long. Ducornet is a master at this kind of super short tales of nightmarish horror. She's a master at revealing just enough information to completely ignite the worst parts of our imagination and just causing her readers to picture things that are better left unseen. For instance, this story here called The Star Chamber. At dusk he was brought before the Star Chamber. We stripped him of his clothes. We cut his belly open so that he could hide nothing. We taped up his mouth and asked him to speak. He would not answer our questions, although we beat him repeatedly about the face and feet. At dawn we kneaded him into a loaf and charred him in our vast ovens of fire. Later we broke this loaf and fed it to the poor. Now in the streets they whisper that the loaf could not be eaten, and a strange new hunger that cannot be silenced spread across the land. That is just killer. And then also we have this story here, Thrift. The chosen infants are taken from their mothers after the 6th week. They are placed in specialized hospitals and tortured. Other than that, they are treated like other normal children, washed, hushed, scolded, and kissed. They are tortured every day at varying intervals for their entire lives. Within a few years, they are all fancifully deformed. None live long. The oldest die broken and senile in 16. They never reach puberty or grow taller than 4 feet. However, individual members, hands, fingers, tongues, feet, and ears, develop and grow to miraculous lengths. When these children die, they are fed to the police dogs. Nothing on the planet is ever wasted. Yeah, she is just, man, talk about like nightmare fuel. Rikki Ducornet's work is amazing. I'm going to be spending a lot of time next year reading all of her fiction and doing some reviews and just some taking a look at this super underrated author. Very dreamlike. You know, she creates this feeling of being half asleep, half awake, kind of in this liminal state in which, you know, it's kind of like reality and fantasy are muddled and it's hard to tell what is what. And speaking of that, the next up is, and that was 1994. So next up we have a pretty well-known work, The King in Yellow, which I always read it from this collection here, which is The Complete Weird Tales of Robert W. Chambers. And The King in Yellow was published in 1895. And it is one of the all-time great works of weird fiction. It's super influential. A lot of things, you know, you hear about A Yellow Sign or The King in Yellow or Carcosa. Again, stuff that was mentioned in the first season of True Detective. The first season of True Detective is a very odd work of weird fiction. I need to watch it again and do like a really detailed study of it. But yeah, this has become a huge influence throughout the history of weird fiction. Chambers' stories are full of madness, of hysteria. full of things that make his characters question reality and their own humanity. Paranoia sets in. The King in Yellow is a fictional play that was created by Chambers and is featured in these stories. And this play, it's like a secretive thing that is better left unseen, unmentioned, unless you desire a descent into madness. It's one of the earlier works of an esoteric tome at the center of a number of stories, kind of like the Necronomicon. And this is where the bonus book comes in. The bonus book is the Starry Wisdom Library, a catalog of the greatest occult auction of all time. This is a book all about all of the weird and esoteric books that populate the works of weird fiction. And it's like they're being auctioned off. And each entry about a book is written from a different author. And there is it's presented in a way like an old library study with reliefs and footnotes and cataloging who the author is and who's going to be bidding on this collection of esoteric knowledge here. But this says that The King in Yellow, a play in 2 acts, written in 1804, to construct an accurate account of the recently discovered play poses an almost insurmountable challenge in view of the contradictory reports concerning it and the dearth of documentation from either the Church of Starry Wisdom or Miskatonic University's library. This is just an awesome book. Super underrated collection of weird tales about the books and all of our weird fiction. So highly recommend that. But back to The King in Yellow here. The King in Yellow actually contains one of my favorite works of fiction, maybe my favorite short story of all time, and that is The Repairer of Reputations. It is a story that feels dangerous. It almost feels like I should not be reading it. It makes me feel like I'm reading something that is going to do me harm when I'm done. And it's all about madness and paranoia. It's almost apocalyptic in its outlook. It fills me with so much unease that it's almost hard to read. It's also a quite baffling work. It's sometimes when I read it, I'm like, what is going on? Even though I've read it multiple times. But at the same time, it's totally engrossing. And I think that's part of Chambers' his genius, is that he's able to create a kind of confusion that the characters feel, and he makes his reader feel that confusion as well. It's bold, it's unparalleled. It's a work of horror fiction that really needs to be experienced. And then next up, we have an anthology, and that is from editor Douglas E. Winter, and that is called Prime Evil. So Winter, he is a respected horror critic. He's written books on Stephen King and Clive Barker, and he's also a lawyer and a professor of law. So he's got these kind of like duality working. Prime Evil is basically a who's who of horror and fantastic writers from the late 80s. You got Stephen King, Paul Hazel, Clive Barker, M. John Harrison, David Morrell, Peter Straub, Charles L. Grant, Ligotti, Campbell, Stryber. So a really great kind of eclectic collection of authors. And it runs the gamut from being kind of like pulpy and exciting to just really a slow build, deliberately paced type stories. All the stories in Prime Evil, and this is from 1988, all of the stories were written specifically for this volume. So you're not getting a bunch of reprinted stories, you're getting original fiction here. And King's The Night Flyer is really fun. It's about a tabloid reporter who's hot on the trail of a vampire who flies from one rural airport to the next in a Cessna looking for victims. And it's super pulpy and written in kind of a hard-boiled style. And then on the very other end of the spectrum, we have the entry from Thomas Ligotti, Alice's Last Adventure, which is he examines the life of a writer who writes really strange children's books. And her life is kind of like, her father was really into Alice in Wonderland. And so she has this weird connection with like Through the Looking Glass, and she's kind of slipping in and out of reality through these membranes of various reflections. And it's very odd, very slow, but the tension, the horror is bubbling up underneath the surface. So quite good. But the star, like the reason you buy this book, is for Orange is for Anguish, Blue for Insanity by David Morrell. So if the name David Morrell does or does not sound familiar, maybe the name John Rambo does. David Morrell was the creator of Rambo, and he wrote the First Blood, which is a fantastic novel, and also the two or three follow-up Rambo novels. So believe it or not, First Blood is actually a great work of English fiction, up there with, I think, Deliverance, as far as just a gritty tale about a man against the world. I had no idea that Morrell also wrote horror. Not only didn't I know that, but I didn't know he was so damn good at it. Orange is for Anguish, Blue for Insanity is just a masterpiece. It's about this artist who becomes obsessed with this kind of unknown painter named Van Dorn, kind of an underrated painter. He says Van Dorn's work was controversial, of course. The scandal his paintings caused among Parisian artists in the late 1800s provided the stuff of legend, kind of like the Rite of Spring performance that legend has it caused a riot. Disdaining conventions, thrusting beyond accepted theories, Van Dorn seized upon the essentials of the craft to which he'd devoted his soul, color, design, and texture. With those principles in mind, he created portraits and landscapes so different, so innovative, that their subject seemed merely an excuse for Van Dorn to put paint onto canvas. So it's all about this artist in modern times who gets obsessed with the work of Van Dorn, and he kind of like recreates Van Dorn's life by studying his paintings, by living in the places that Van Dorn lived, going to where his subjects were, and he becomes completely obsessed with this painter. And that obsession, because of that obsession, he falls into this world of like just nightmare horror. And a fantastic story, really unsettling, and again, it is a slow burn. You're not going to be like super excited while reading it, but the amounting the tension and the dread creeps in, and it's almost like too much to read at some points. It's a really great study of madness. And then finally, we have what I think is the all-time great anthology of horror, and from a totally crazy source, but from Barnes & Noble Books, we have To Sleep, Perchance to Dream, Nightmare. And the editors here are Zymanowicz, Weinberg, and Greenberg. I don't know anything about them, but this was published in 1993. It's a total oddity. I mean, it looks just like some cheap, it just looks like some cheap Barnes & Noble book. You can often find these at used bookstores for next to nothing, but this is truly, truly one of the great horror anthologies. Almost every story in this collection is incredible, and just look at what you get. I mean, it's the opening track, and this isn't an album, the opening story, The Drunkard's Dream, from Sheridan Le Fanu, one of my all-time favorite stories. It just kicks things off into high gear. Absolutely amazing. The language is a little difficult to penetrate because it's an older style. It's from 1838. But I find that the story benefits a lot. You benefit a lot when you read it out loud, kind of like you're reading a poem out loud, some poetry, and it helps to get into the lyrical prose. But then you have Wilkie Collins, Bram Stoker, Ambrose Bierce, Robert W. Chambers, A. Merritt, Henry Whitehead, Robert E. Howard. The Robert E. Howard story, The Black Stone, is maybe my favorite Robert E. Howard story I've ever read. It's a weird tale about this esoteric tome, again, of forbidden knowledge. It's a book about these nameless cults, the Black Book, and the book leads the narrator to, of course, horrific discoveries. If you like stories about books and stories about secret societies, that's a super good one. You got C.L. Moore, H.P. Lovecraft, Fritz Lieber, Robert Bloch, Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, Perchance to Dream, classic work of old horror there. Carl Edward Wagner, Ramsey Campbell, Thomas Ligotti, Robert Aikman, Charles L. Grant, and Clive Barker. I mean, just an absolutely fantastic collection of horror short stories that all kind of, they all have a thematic similarity. They're all about dreams, about nightmares, about sleep. And yeah, just one of the great, and the fact that this is so ubiquitous, I've seen this in many used bookstores around my area, and I hardly ever hear anybody talk about it. And I think it's a super underrated collection that if you're into horror fiction at all, this should be in your library. So, all right, well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We took a look at To Sleep, Perchance to Dream, Nightmare, Prime Evil, The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers, with a bonus look at the Starry Wisdom Library. And then we took a look at The Complete Butcher's Tales by Rikki Ducornet. And we started things off with, of course, My Work Is Not Yet Done by Thomas Ligotti. So if you guys want some nightmares coming up in October, check out any of these books, and I hope they deliver. So take it easy, guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.